Good afternoon. The time is now 3:30, October 5th. Call to order the City of Norwood Planning Commission. Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Present.
Mayor Schneider, Mrs. Sickinger, Mr. Hockney,
Present.
Mr. Sewer.
Here. Right. First item on the agenda, the approval of minutes. Do we have any changes to the minutes?
I didn't give you any.
All right. We'll postpone the approval of those minutes until our next meeting in November. Moving forward to old business, we have the ongoing zoning ordinance amendment review. I believe Mr. Skelly has provided us with a revised ordinance. Mike, do you have any comments on?
Sure, I'll just give members a quick outline. So good afternoon. You have in front of you this afternoon the latest of the second draft, which is dated September the 9th. And within that, there's essentially 7 items included for consideration for amendment. Some we have talked about very briefly, such as porous paving. There's been some discussion on changes for the minor plan unit development applications. But there's a couple new things looking at recharging electric vehicle stations and also some kind of minor house cleaning things which are included again in the September 9th ordinance. So I'll leave it with you guys or however the chair directs as to would you like to go section by section and further discuss them as to their merits or further editing, or how would you like to proceed? But what you have in front of you is approximately 11 pages. Now, the bulk of this document includes the draft wording for townhouse, row house amendments, which is something not necessarily new. It's minimally referenced in the existing zoning ordinance, but it's really not flushed out. I think we had some initial discussion that would probably be a good dwelling unit to include with some more robust design standards, so therefore it's included in the current draft that you see in front of you this afternoon.
No, if I could make a proposal that I'd like Mike to go through it quickly, the ones that we have gone over before.
Yes.
But then on both the row houses and EV, because I think those are the two that I don't anyway, and let us ask a question if any of us here have a question. But I think we have hashed them at different times, all of them, except like Mike said, I don't think we've gone into row houses very deep.
I
And
agree.
we touched on EV
think
being
that's-
recharging, I know, last time.
I
But
think that's a perfect way for us.
is that okay?
Absolutely.
We got kind of a relatively short agenda, so
This is the bulk of our agenda, so. Mike, if you would.
you're not getting out of it, Mike.
Sure. Okay, so as it's structured in the agenda, what I'll do on pages 2, primarily sections number 2 through 8, primarily deal with uses that are stated in the ordinance, sorority, fraternity house, we have agricultural uses, and I guess the argument or question is, why do we have these uses if it's not a existing land use already within the city? Is it necessary? Is it going to cause us more grief? I had initial discussions with Keith Moore of the Law Department, and it's not something that if we would exclude it, we're doing any harm. It's more, what is the preference, what is the need to have it within the zoning ordinance? So this is something that initially I was given a recommendation from Mark Reeves, the building inspector, and his concern is like, you know, why state it or why allow it or why include it for potential consideration if it's something we don't have right now and in May we don't want to encourage anyways. So those again are sections 2 through 8.
So go through a scenario for me. If somebody comes forward, let's say it's up on the end of Montgomery Road, right next to our partner at Xavier, and I don't know, the Pikes want to build a fraternity. What would happen, I guess?
Well, if it's, to me, one of those
Right.
things,
If we do this,
yeah, so it's, I think it's how they would want to proceed. So if it's affiliated with a, college or university, and it's considered on campus, that would typically consider like a dormitory type thing, which is sometimes either express
Okay.
or considered ancillary. If it's not, then having these uses listed as it's currently is good to have, because then they're not requesting a zoning ordinance amendment or having the chief building official make a determination if it would be clear or not.
I'm fine with that.
Mrs. Town, if you'll note that Mayor Schneider has arrived.
Thank you.
We're discussing the zoning ordinance text amendment.
Okay.
It's item C1 on our agenda.
So moving on to then section 9. In section 9, we have spoken about at least for 2, maybe even 3 meetings dealing with porous paving. So I think at this point, section 9, which is the bottom part of page 2 and continues over onto page 3, is something that, I think we've addressed. It's written addressing both minor residential, major commercial ones, and I believe it has sufficient control and oversight by both the chief building official and the city engineer.
Anybody have any questions on that one? I agree. We've discussed that one at length.
Can we ponder that just a minute?
Yes.
I think the last sentence is an important part that says it shall be designed, engineered, and implemented according to the manufacturer's specifications. But I'm all good with it.
Mike, what was, and again, I think you've done a nice job. On item 3, where it says applicants proposing to utilize pervious pavement
Okay.
shall ensure, what was your intent for the way 3 is worded? I just didn't quite understand it.
When you say 3, are you talking C?
Number 3, the bullets, 5 bullets. It's on page 3.
Oh, sorry, page 3, okay. Sorry, can you better direct, so 3,
I don't see that.
Areas damaged by snowplows or other vehicles shall be repaired promptly?
That one, yeah. I just don't, what do you mean by that when it's underneath the title of applicants proposing?
Yeah.
So someone comes to us, wants, not to us, but the building, wants to put in pervious pavement.
yeah.
They need to ensure the following. Does that make sense?
Correct, so yeah, this is more of a post-installation
So it's an operational
maintenance.
issue then?
Yeah. Now, sometimes there's, when these things are put into place, there's an agreement with her on tighter that you're responsible. It's not the municipality's responsibility to do any correction. If it's not working, these things can get clogged.
Okay. I just don't know how the building plan examiner would ever be able to say, you don't meet that, because it's something that happens in the
Correct,
future.
it's a design.
See what I'm saying?
Yes, it's a
Okay.
design requirement as opposed to a post-construction. So I guess, it could be removed,
Leave go.
yeah.
Conditions of the permit?
There's a.
It could be such as conditions of the permit that they sign off they will do that in the future.
Yep.
Thank you.
But you're right, it is a separate entity that's going to enforce that in the future.
It's correct.
Good to have it up front.
And this puts a lot of, it gives a lot of leeway to the chief building official, is the way I read this, which is one of our goals, to put those things that are things that they should be responsible for and let them
Sure.
move forward, so I'm fine.
Wouldn't that put number 4 under the same category
Yes.
then?
Yes, more of an operational issue that,
Yeah. What I would suggest maybe is that I'll redraft this in a manner where, as suggested by Kerry Townhouse, that that could be placed on a permit approval form.
but I really like number 5, so don't think that it's 3,
Yeah.
4, and 5. I mean, I think 5 is an important one.
I do see with number 3 and 4, when you're talking about a larger installation, something for an apartment complex, where we may want some kind of plans up front about how you're going to do that. If you're talking about a 50-unit apartment complex and you're going to put down pervious pavement, how are you going to sweep that area?
Right.
How are you going to plow that area? Making sure that it's something that really can be plowed.
The largest one that I'm aware of, it's not in the city of Norwood, it's right adjacent, is University Station, is the temporary parking for basketball games. That's in Cincinnati, but it's right adjacent to the border of Norwood. When I read those two things, I see what they're saying, because I know you do have to keep both of them for the snow plow but it's very hard
Yeah.
to plow those areas, very hard.
You guys want to move on? Okay.
So-
So section 12, so this is similar to the work that we did for including exemptions for front yard fences, where if a homeowner would meet certain criteria, they could go ahead and do it without going through the need and time and expense of a BZA hearing. So I received a request from Cameron Kelly, who's a contractor who installs HVAC units, and he's generally attending BZA hearings on behalf of his client to require dimensional relief to have these things. So through a couple of emails back and forth and sharing ideas, we came across, similar to the fence amendment, that if a HVAC unit met a certain size and it was located in a certain manner, that could also be treated as a almost ministerial approval by the building official. So what you see on 12E is suggested wording for that. And the bottom part that's highlighted, and you have a cross-reference for green highlighting, is essentially looking at what typically a larger, in this case a 4-ton HVAC unit would be like, what's the size, and then that rolling into that threshold limit. So at this point, at least by email, I think Cameron Kelly was support of what he saw, and I showed this for staff. I didn't have any concerns yet that it would be any sort of issue. If anything, it's probably worthwhile saving the time and again going to the BZA.
Mike, on letter E in section 12, on the third line, it says subject to, and I would add the word appropriate at that point. The reason I make that suggestion is above it talks about air conditioners, rain barrels, and other small similar accessory structures, and then it currently says subject to HVAC permit approval, but I don't think we want to be doing that with a rain barrel.
Okay.
So just kind of clarifying that not everything needs an HVAC
Gotcha.
permit.
The other question I would have is 36 cubic feet, which it seems like these heat pumps that they're putting outside are becoming larger and larger. And there were smaller units before. Is 36 cubic feet the right number for that? That's
Well,
what,
that's
3
right.
by 3
I gave
by
it,
3?
some, fudge factor. 26 cubic feet is what I saw in terms of went back and forth. I think 36 gives you that additional cushioning. Whether 36 is probably considered a little bit too much then, I don't know. I figure, some people are getting larger homes in excess of, 3,000 square feet. Is it worth having it or not? I don't know.
I don't think it has to. I think it has more to do with the technology. It seems like the outside condensers have gotten bigger, whether that makes them more efficient because they have more airflow or whatever. But I guess 36 is probably the right number if you've already change that. So, yeah, okay.
Mike, going above 36 would just require the person to go to BZA, is that correct?
Correct, yeah, so if they would meet the intent of this, like, letter of the law, then everything would be fine. If it's, they're deficient for setbacks or whatever, then it's back to the BZA.
Any further questions or comments on that section?
So if this, do you mind how many are going to be there? If somebody comes and it's in a residential zone, but they've got a non-conforming use and they want to put 6 AC units there, is that going to be something that in the future someone's going to ask about at the building department?
If the 6 doesn't exceed the 36 cubic feet.
So that's total? I'm talking about individual condensing units for individual apartments, which happens sometimes, such as the corner beach in Norwood Avenue. I'm just making sure.
Yeah, the way I'm reading it, I don't think we would preclude having multiple units out there.
I would agree. In if you have a rain barrel and some other structure, that doesn't stop you from having the AC unit. So,
But I think your point, Gary, is if it's a two-family, can they have 2 units that are under 36 cubic feet? And my answer would be, the way I read this, yes.
I would agree.
I agree.
If the setbacks are correct, the sizes, they can have 2.
Okay. Thank you.
Was that your question? Okay.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to section 13, the top of page 4. Now, this is something that was more recently occurred with regards to the processing of a minor PUD that we had. And in that case, how it's written right now, it specifies that minor PUD shall be considered in accordance to again, it's intended, the standards of a conditional use application. What we had was an application instance with the interpretation that the building commissioner preferred that it actually went to the BZA for a full hearing. And one of the members actually, it was also raised by the solicitor representing the applicant, that they were kind of questioning or debating that interpretation. So at least by one of the directions from the BZA members, they wanted that to be clarified. So what you see in section 13 is that clarification that it would just go to the planning commission meeting, and it provides for stating, again, the public hearing, the notice, and we actually did a tweak last meeting for recommendation from Cary Town that at least for the processing, applications be submitted on the 7th of the month. So that should be listed under item 13A. Now, I just want to verify, I believe that's in your copies, correct?
It's right here, yes.
Good. So I still have 20 of mine. So essentially, that's the purpose for amending, or what you see in section 13.
Any questions or discussion on that section at this time?
It's really a clarification of how we operate at this point with setting some parameters.
Correct.
Parameters that the city must follow as well as the applicant.
Correct, and we're not changing anything. It'll still follow the 200-foot radius. Everything else is just clarifying that absolutely it will just go to the planning commission meeting.
So I'm looking at it because I want to make sure I know what we're getting rid of. But what we're deleting is really the issue about council.
No,
As
no,
I
no.
read the existing?
No, in the ordinance right now, when it, chapter 1155, it provides reference, minor land developments do not go to council. They go strictly to the planning commission meeting, but it's how it's written in 1155-21 that it could be interpreted that it has to go to the BZA for own separate hearing for that.
Okay.
And that was the interpretation made by the chief building official.
I missed that BZA meeting. I think it was also a BZA member. I missed the meeting of where, because I've read it again. I just don't see BZA process in there.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody does. Okay. Okay.
You're good? Okay. Section 14 on the bottom of page 4. So this is something we have in this particular case, about 5 acres located on the east side of Montgomery. There essentially was a site-specific amendment dealing with the PUD, and how it's written in the implementing ordinance, which is ordinance number 28 of 2014, was in addition to changing the map for this specific location, council desired that there was 13 uses listed, you'll see it on page 5, A through M, that were precluded or prohibited from that particular site. We're having, again, the fallout of that particular decision right now through essentially litigation resolving, and hopefully it should be resolved very shortly. But I felt it necessary, because the site probably will take some time to develop, and in the future, to have that specified right in the zoning ordinance, so there is no confusion. It's there for everyone to see and read. Typically people sometimes don't have access, don't have the ability to go to the clerk's department and get all the amending ordinances, so this is incorporated and codified into the actual zoning ordinance.
Any questions or discussion?
This is the parcel that runs along Lawson Way, along Lexington?
Yeah, just north of Wilson Way.
Okay. How does somebody find an ordinance that modifies the zoning code that hasn't been updated in the formal documents? I'm just curious. You said that.
Correct, yeah. I think for the average person, they would probably look at the ordinance and find it. If you're a consultant, planner, engineer, surveyor, whatever, they go the extra step, and then that's why they go sometimes to the clerk's department and they want to say, hey, can you pull out the last amendments for the last couple of years, just in case they weren't wholly incorporated. But that's something that's typically done over and above, and typically done by consultants, because they know sometimes ordinances are passed.
But I mean, you just have to skim through the amendments, is what you're saying?
You do. You have to. And again, that's the 5 or 10 people that are kind of doing that for a developer, whatever, just covering their bases.
How often do we take our amendments and update our code?
Annually.
Do we do it annually?
Yeah.
At least that often.
Yeah. So
Very good.
what happens right now, just to give you background, and this is how I caught it recently, at the last council meeting, we have a Service American legal publisher, I believe, who take the amendments, I guess the clerk's department sends it to them, and they immediately upload it to the website. And when we had the amendment several months ago for the central business district concerning the former Quality Inn, we tweaked that a bit because we had a prospective developer that was interested in including outpatient clinics, and that wasn't expressly permitted in the central business district. So that service, within a few months after council approved it, already incorporated
Okay,
it.
very good. Thank you.
So they are good. It's just something where if it's not specified, and if this kind of just fell through the cracks, it wasn't incorporated.
It's listed in the front of the code. This section and title is listed in the front of the code as a PUD. This is one of the few PUDs that actually has more language in it with restrictions, though. So they would see the PUD and then have to call council to ask for a copy of it, or the law department to ask for a copy of it, to see
Okay.
what it entailed.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So that brings us to the beginning of discussions about row homes and townhouses. So starting at section 15 and onwards, you have various new amendments, new text, deletions that introduced the definition of it and then start providing a substitution of various policies and introducing new policies. And what you'll see, just so as you're flipping through, are various charts or maps. Now, the chart, for example, that you see on the top of page 6, that will actually be incorporated into the actual zoning ordinance, specifying minimum lot area, setbacks, etc. I've included various maps and aerial photographs to help the Planning Commission members visualize what we're considering, what we're talking about. So when each of those sections are raised, what does a 25-foot by 100-foot depth lot looks like, I provided this chart when we're talking about front yard setbacks and whether a townhouse development would include front yard parking. I included an aerial photograph. On the top of page 8, when we start drilling down through a little bit more of the design work, setbacks, rear yard setbacks, I borrowed a image from a zoning ordinance from Titusville, Florida, that depicts both the setbacks and how the units would be staggered. Now, in this particular instance, versus my prior memo that showed almost each unit having an offset by a few feet, this one, for the convenience of the developer, provides exactly to the letter of law. What I'm suggesting here is that no more than 2 side-by-side units would be identical. So in this case, you would have the middle unit pushed back a little, but otherwise, 2 units together of the same frontage and setback, the next 2 units pushed back a bit, and then the other remaining 6 brought forward. And typically, again, as we'll read, and again, I'm not suggesting tonight, this is a fairly dense section. We can go through it now, we can talk a little bit subsequent meetings, but typically what I'm recommending, I'm not listing a definitive number of dwelling units that would be in a row for a particular townhouse block. As part of page 8, item section 22, and when you see D, I refer to it as the horizontal length of a building block. So traditionally I'm thinking a maximum length of 190 feet, which would equate to around 7, potentially 8 units, but how you would do it, for a minimum frontage of 25 feet. So I've used these similar provisions. It's pretty common, and again, as you saw with the example from Titusville, in that particular case, they're using a slightly smaller frontage, being 24 feet, but they're providing greater depth. Their minimum lot area is 3,000 square feet. Looking at what we have right now in Norwood, I'm thinking around 2,500 being the minimum lot area should be sufficient to provide ample opportunity for the developer and still adhering to now the suggested design parameters. So I'm not too sure if you guys had an opportunity to kind of go through it before the meeting, but I'm happy to kind of address the questions. But I wanted to give you at least the lay of the land, how this is structured. So for the implementing ordinance, I will remove all the graphic images, the maps, the aerial photographs. The chart will remain because that is already in our zoning ordinance, but everything else will be deleted. So, but I think just as a final comment for this section, the intent or suggestion is that I believe, and again, how we could spend more time better defining row homes versus townhouses. I'm kind of treating them as identical, but without too much policies, we can create a decent design option for developers to use for either looking at buying existing properties, doing a land assembly, or if there's right now appropriate sites that could be redeveloped, that this would be a good housing option, both for affordability and attractive design. Now, again, with this current boom that we're having, when I provided the earlier memo, we're having in the region sometimes townhomes $600,000 to $800,000 and above. That's not necessarily affordable, but based on a conventional single family, it's a more efficient design and usually a more cost-effective dwelling unit to construct. So,
Can you speak to Section 20D? Section 20D?
Sure.
The bolded part there?
correct. So in the section, we're looking to have amending the existing provisions, and what I'm suggesting is that right now, let me just flip to it.
We're talking about this maximum impervious area restriction
Yeah.
shall not apply to row homes or townhomes.
Yeah, to me, it's, right now, we do have a restriction, so the front yard for a traditional single family, or if it was a semi or a duplex, that area, and it's kind of depicted in the aerial photograph, that you still have to ideally maintain, as written in the ordinance, not for existing situations, a minimum of 25% of your front yard to remain in green space, in terms of having that requirement. So to me, I don't know, and it's without spending a lot of time doing iterations and surveying, can that still be accommodated for a potential row house where you have, let's say for argument's sake, a driveway being 10 feet in width, and if your maximum lot is going to be 25, can you still accommodate that green space? So my concern is that, without spending too much more time, I don't think it would adhere for a row house or a townhouse. So, and that's why, again, I provided the image, at least depending, it comes down to what is the developer going to choose for the minimum frontage. So something in excess of 25 feet, I could see that definitely providing for a 25% green space. Something at 25 feet or less, it's likely not. So I kind of used an example right now, just showing at least an existing streetscape, how it would look like.
I mostly state that because of the forethought, that you're already thinking about those things and trying to find solutions and making sure that the numbers and everything works from the beginning. That's something that I just appreciate.
Yeah, and here's like it's going through it, and I don't know if we had some initial discussions with this group, or again, at my age, I've been through several different planning commissions where it comes down to, and parking is usually the fatal flaw in these things, where depending which municipality is and how important off-street parking is. So I was trying to blend in and require the fact that a developer could include, and again, the prior memo did show images where a developer included the garage, and I don't want to call it like a dog snout where you would have, it's a kind of an ugly design where they stick the entire depth of the garage right out front. That can be incorporated into the design of the building. But I wanted to provide the flexibility to the developer whether they decide to either have rear-loaded garages or something separate or front, that you could go through iterations and iterations trying to blend it. So I was trying to at least figure it out. So to me, there's no ideal situation. It's more what's the tolerance of the municipality. So we could just say, for these situations, it has to be absolute. We want front yard garages. It has to be, but they have to be designed in this particular manner. That's perfectly fine as well. So it's more, I think, in a case-by-case situation. At this point, it'll only be the R3 zone that will have the provision for townhouses or row houses. And what does the Planning Commission and Council believe to be the most important design elements to these things? Sometimes having attractive units, making it not look like a Berlin Wall, and as I mentioned, sometimes off-street parking is huge. So almost insisting that each of these units has to have a garage, you know.
Mike, I only know of one that has come in front of BZA, but it was for a setback. And without mentioning the project, I don't know where that project is at today, to be candid with you. But
Yeah.
I tried to read your items and think about that project, because we didn't have any of this when that project came to the building, to Dan.
Correct, and again, it's,
So-
and I can't remember the name, but when I first saw that, that was like, I would call it very tight, it's almost like shoehorning that unit into that property. And in that particular case, it had to go through, I believe, a couple hearings.
Well, I don't know if because I don't know everything that's in conflict, so I don't want to bring up a
Yeah.
project that might be in conflict. So
Yeah. Well,
I
because
just don't want to mention it, if that's okay. But
I
do
would
want to
think that
ask you,
in that particular example, I don't think that development would meet
Meet
these
this.
standards. Now, they
That's-
could still apply for
that
eventual variances.
you just cut to the chase.
Yeah.
I don't, even though we said it did.
Okay.
Not, it met our standards because of the setback variances we gave it. So when you say, and this is just, how can most of these parcels become one parcel, right?
Well, that's how it's
And then
written.
you break it up, but a developer will buy a parcel and then want to build a row house. It's not like they're 20-foot parcels, are they?
They are if it's freehold, because a freehold isn't that you own
You
each
just
individual.
answered my question. I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that term, freehold.
Yeah.
Thank you. What does that mean, Mike?
You own both the lot and the building. So it's a common wall. Like, to me, it's no different than having a semi-detached home.
So it's like a demising wall is the line then down the center line of the demising wall, or firewall between the units?
Yeah.
Becomes the, okay, learning something tonight. Freehold.
No dog snout, no shoehorning.
I-
Put those in there.
Freehold.
Freehold.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay.
Excuse me.
So yeah, at this point, this is, several pages, dealing with a new dwelling unit. There's probably, other options when we had it, as you mentioned in that particular case. We were trying to work with the developer and make it work. At the end of the day, because the project is not built, we don't know how it looks and all that. These are definitely more intensive, more robust standards. My suspicion is that that particular development could not meet these standards because it was such a very tight property to deal with. But, I think at the end of the day, we're providing something that hopefully will get a decent, attractive, and a new type of housing stock. And like anything else, if there is either one or two of these conditions that a developer could not make, then it would be through the BCA if they had, good sound reasoning and justification for it.
Some subjectivity in this one.
For these policies,
Yes.
yeah.
I
And
mean,
again,
it's not like setback of 8 feet. I mean, it's, when you read your architectural, it's my reason for bringing that up. I could see a developer arguing that in his mind it meets certain criteria when in fact someone at the building department or anyone would say, no, it doesn't,
correct,
Your
and that's
view,
sometimes
Mike.
I use the variation when they talk about roof lines, different window treatment, which definitely goes to your concern, but that's why also there's provisions for offset, which to me forces the developer not to create the Berlin Wall effect. You will have some special treatment. Again, I think even if we had more reasonable home prices right now and these units were selling for $200,000, I think people would want to have minor changes. You know, maybe one house would have a brick finish for the first story, someone might have, you know, stone, some people might have different colored siding.
I understand it,
Yeah.
but now you're putting that in whose court? Dan Bly's?
Well, ultimately for approving the permit, correct?
Which has to follow these guidelines.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's essentially, in a nutshell, giving the overview. But I think probably my suggestion, if you guys want to spend more time, like I say, it is a fairly dense section. And by all means, you know, if there's questions, email me or bring up to the next.
And I didn't do it, Mike. I think I'm going to pull the submission that's probably 7 months or 8 months ago and actually just walk through your conditions and see how would it have worked if these would have been in place when that came to us. I don't even know if that area is an R3.
It is not.
Okay, I didn't think it was, but so that's kind of the first parameter that you placed in here, was it had to be in an R3.
And the reason being because R3 does permit multifamily, which is 3 or more. So,
But you see the point, that one, it would have been kicked out immediately.
yeah.
Okay. I'd like to be able to come back, Mike, and just do a test on that one, unless the other committee members feel like we need to move this faster.
No,
No,
I don't feel like we do. And I would, with a big change like this, I'd like to give everyone on the planning commission an opportunity to weigh in. Since we don't have all our members here today, I would certainly be in favor of putting this off until at least our November meeting.
Because I agree with Mike. I think that this may be a future in an area like Norwood. It's got great location, but small lots. Construction costs are very high. How can you get more? And that townhouses and row houses seem to fit that bill. So, very possible. So,
And again, it's really, again, people could claim or challenge that, hey, this now does make it more expensive, et cetera, but I've also seen very, very ugly townhouse developments where a developer is just there to provide a costly, efficient unit, and unfortunately, architectural control, aesthetics takes a backseat.
okay, thank you.
Any further questioning or discussions on that item?
No, sir.
Mike, if you'll take us to section 23.
So the last provision that we have listed on page 10, section 23, that was something that was introduced very recently, also by a member of the BZA, and it was also copied by Councilor Frazen, where we have right now in section 1151.36 for essentially gas stations. And however, and whatever the reason was, and maybe it was whoever drafted it was already conceiving that in the future we'll have more for electric charging stations, that we have fairly detailed standards right now that are listed in the ordinance. And the claim or argument was made, typically for a conventional gas station, whether it's Kroger or Shell or whatever, whether it's because of just how these things have been designed and built over the decades, the fact that they're storing and dealing with petroleum, a flammable explosive product, that they have a different standard and a different feel and a different layout. I don't know what the experience of Planning Commission or most people, but for the electric charging station, it's more of a minimalist sort of design. I've been through a few of them, and I wouldn't necessarily call it a clean design, but it's very minimalist. You have these little pods, and that's about it. There's sometimes no secondary retail. You don't have canopies. You don't have this kind of provision where, okay, you go here for the gasoline and you go here for somewhere else, and they sometimes channel you in certain these things. It's more of a compound. Not to say that I've seen also ones that are fairly sophisticated, but the argument being is that essentially the design standards that you see for gas stations are essentially overkill, and they're probably not necessarily needed or required or make sense for electric charging station. So the question was raised, could the city essentially, and it's an easy fix, just delete recharging from that particular term, and then do one of two things: just delete it for now and not worry about it, and just have it apply to conventional petroleum gas stations, and then at some date we could go back and create policy for EV charging stations. But at this point, I had no objection. It kind of made sense. I understood the concern and argument. I said, sure, I'd bring it up to the Planning Commission meeting. So in section 23, you see a lot of dots because, you know, I wanted to test the waters with you guys first as to, do you believe that to be a valid argument? And if so, how would you like to proceed? And if you do, it could be a very quick fix by just deleting the terms recharging station. So it would just apply to
So
petrol.
if I own a piece of property up on Montgomery Road,
Mhm.
and I want to put 5 charging stations in right along Montgomery Road, and it doesn't have to be a very big site because it's only a
It's
wide enough.
minimalist.
It's minimalist. So what do we feel like? This is I think that I'm thinking about. Do I have any real problem with somebody, a private investor, putting 5 charging stations in that is payable by credit card, so that everybody who's driving through wants to go in and do a quick charge, like you do at Myers or wherever has this charges now? I mean, that's what I think people are asking. Why do you make it a gas station? It's not a gas station. It's a plug and play. You do it in residential areas,
Correct.
people's houses. So
And I'll give you an example. The biggest one I've seen is actually down in Sarasota. It's behind a Whole Foods, and it probably has, I don't know, 40, close to 50 of those pods. It's huge. And there's no canopy, there's no separate access, but people basically leave their cars, go into the Whole Foods or whatever, one of the other businesses in the plaza, shop, and then come back half an hour, their car's charged. But
So you're right. Probably nobody would do what I just said because they're not going to sit there and wait for it to charge. They want to do something, unless it's the library.
yeah,
It's an idea, isn't it? Get people to read books, and you go. I don't know. I do believe a simple fix would get it out of this section.
Yeah.
We want restrictions on
yeah.
gas
Like
stations.
first, I thought it was a good argument because, like he was right. If you look at, item C, all vehicle entrances shall be at least 50 feet away from the street intersection. Well, if it's only going to be, in your analogy, a couple of those pods, it's not a lot of traffic. It's not like a conventional petroleum fuel station where people are running in, filling up, getting their car washed, picking up a jug of milk.
So what if Surrey Square, our friends from Chicago, come in, the owners, and say, I want to put 5 charging stations in? What would guide Dan Bly on the approval process right now? This?
I guess he could. Yeah.
We don't want that.
I don't know. That's you.
I mean, I'd
you guys tell me.
I'd
It's
rather
like-
put 5 stations in so that people can go in Kroger's and shop,
Yeah.
or any other store along.
And I think you're right, the EV charging stations are not going to be a primary use for any piece of property. They're going to be attached to something else. People are coming there to do their shopping, grocery shopping, whatever it might be, and while they're there, they're going to get their car charged. You're not going to pull them to a lot that has no other use, just to charge.
There should be one behind like Walgreens, so people could like park.
Yeah.
Good thought.
That's right.
I think
But,
we've
Mike-
already done that.
My question would be recharging, when that word was originally put in there, when was that? I mean, because EV charging stations have not came about until it's been the last 4 years. When was recharging put in, and why was it put in that way at that time? I mean, if it was for gas stations back in 1970 that they put this in because they wanted to set this up, and they said recharging, there's a difference.
Yeah.
That's recharging, a car battery that was a 12-volt battery, the car was broke down and they're recharging. This is maybe a different reference to recharging in that aspect.
I guess this whole section for 115136 fuel recharging station, that was amended in 2013. So, and that was a year a lot of, major amendments occurred with this ordinance. So I assume at the time, the author or the Planning Commission Council were being innovative and saying, hey, we're going to just put these together because they're roughly the same thing. But again, I think most of us can recall in 2013, there wasn't probably a lot of these EV stations around at that time, if any.
It seemed like Keith knew a lot about the 2013 upgrade. He mentioned something at the zoning.
I think he's like Nostradamus. And
Something like that, yeah.
I don't have a problem taking it out of there in reference to petroleum fueling stations, but I do think that there needs to be some parameters put in place for the city to review and provide guidance to people that want to put charging stations in.
Okay.
There you
A
go.
little or a lot, how's that?
Well, I think there needs to be enough that Dan has some control over it, or the city has some control over it to say, it's a great opportunity for.
And would that kind of idea also cross over to residential people that want to put their own charging station in for their own electric car that might, there was a time in the world, which was brought up after the zoning meeting, the residential, that there weren't a lot of EVs, so people that did have them would actually put it out on the web so that drivers could stop by their house if they needed it. But what was brought up after BZA was, what do I do if I want to put one in? What parameters am I under? What am I
Do
allowed
like
to
anybody
with
who
it?
does modifications to your power from the transformer, you got to go through IBI.
That was my answer.
Well,
That's it.
I don't know that that's true because people it's a plug and play. As long as they've got the connector set up in their garage. Now, granted, getting a
gotta make the
220
connections to the
connector,
pit, right.
but people might have already prepared for that. They knew they were going to do something else. They might have a welder that they run in their garage, and they did that in the 70s. Still 220, they can plug and play right into that. So I think the question Carrie's asking, is there a permit process that we're going to require residents to go through to put a charging station in their home for their private vehicle?
I mean, if you guys are going to talk about it, I thought you should maybe think about that part too. Maybe.
I'm just thinking if it's going to be for personal use,
Yeah.
these won't apply, or any sort of design standards. So
I think
long
the
as-
IBI stuff works. I mean, if you're going to change the electricity, you need to have the changes. They need to be.
Do we care except that the power is correctly wired? Are you trying to make a fee on every, I mean, it's not about a fee basis, I don't think.
yeah.
I think it's about safety, isn't it?
Yeah, it's more about safety.
I mean, it's a good topic because it's coming. This is,
Well, no, and that's what I said. Like,
this is going to continue to grow more, not
if I could
less.
pester you guys for a little bit more guidance based on the mayor's and yours. So, and again, Surrey Square is a great example because I could easily see in the next couple of months, a year or so, they're coming in saying, hey, we want to put 5. So my question being, what do you think the threshold is? If someone wants to put in 10, that we start demanding more robust policy standards or whatever. Because the bigger place like Surrey Square, they might say, hey, people will come here, it's a reason.
It's based on supply and demand right now, and there's not that much demand for it. So they're not going to come in and say, we're going to make this a regional charging station. I mean, Kroger's have them. There are some Krogers that already have charging stations. And so when you're looking, I would say look around at what some other communities are doing.
Okay.
I mean, this might be something we put out on the Center for Local Governments and see if they have any type of, and that could maybe provide us some guidance on just what's out there right now and make your job a little bit easier.
Yeah, yeah, I'm just kind of
A
curious.
lot of communities have already done the research, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think it is a worthy subject to bring up and a good discussion to have because it's coming, you know.
Back to your first statement, though, does committee have any problem with deleting from the topic here, recharging stations from this section and just leaving it a fuel? I don't have any problem with that, knowing that we want to put something in here about electric charging stations.
Yeah.
It doesn't apply properly where it is, so removing that right now
Seems to make sense.
makes sense, yes.
Any further discussion or questions? Okay. I think that brings us to the end.
Did you already talk about the?
No. Pardon me.
Oh,
End of
yeah,
old
that
business.
part. Okay, excuse me.
Moving on to new business. This regards Raymond Strecker's request to change part of a lot along Mills Avenue. Included in your packet is a copy of the letter that I sent to Mr. Strecker, detailing information we received from Chief Building Official Dan Bly, including some maps for his consideration. So we may see Mr. Strecker in the future making that request after he's had an opportunity to consider the information we've given him. Just wanted to include that as notification so that each person on the Planning Commission was aware of the response that we made.
Would you entertain a question?
I would.
The first one says, the first issue is fire safety. The wall of the church needs to be not less than 10 feet from property line to avoid requiring of wall windows and doors to be fire rated. And remember when he was here and we were discussing, why would they put the property line where they did? And that would make sense, you know, from the last meeting, that would make sense of why that line was put where it is. So, okay.
And we also don't have information to determine that perhaps that is fire rated, so it may be, and this may not be an issue moving that line
Okay.
for that purpose.
All right.
So we kind of tried to provide enough information they can go out there and study it and make sure it's the right decision for all the parties involved there. Any other questions or comments on that item?
Thank you.
All right, takes care of new business. Leaves us with adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
One kind of open discussion that came out of the BZA. I've got a few members that have asked me to make sure that at a high level that I just keep them informed, if I could, of what's happening here. And I got my hands slapped. I have not been doing that religiously. So I'm going to be asking Carrie to add that as an agenda item to our BZA, that I'll take the agenda from these meetings just so people can understand. One of the members asked me, he read the amendment that's going in front of council, and he said, I didn't realize we're deleting chain link fences completely as an approved fence. And I'm not sure if something's, I didn't know we deleted it.
Okay. With regards to that particular issue, so that concern was brought up through an email I received from Andrew Moore, BZA member, and
Correct.
also copied for Councillor Frazen. I responded, at least for the fences, that's, again, it's an easy fix. It was written, and again, maybe it was kind of prematurely or done in haste, but it would be an easy fix for council that we would just say, well, fine, remove it, and you would still allow then chain link fences in the rear yard, et cetera.
Absolutely.
Just as a follow-up to that, there was related, when I mentioned earlier, the concern for the Quality Inn site, which is part of the Central Business District. So at the last council meeting, I asked councils, or requested them as a favor, if they could ensure that the ordinance that was in play, which is the draft that they have right now for the second reading, include the updated language just to make sure that they all integrate successfully. And then in the email, I did suggest or remind Councilor Frazen that she could introduce the request to also make that minor amendment. And at least at the last meeting, I don't believe that was suggested as well. I think it could occur through a number of ways. I could independently raise it at the next council meeting. The planning commission could say, hey, in hindsight, this is something we believe needs to be corrected. Can you please also make the minor correction as well? The law department has already taken some language with regards to what I mentioned before, and that'll be corrected for the next, I believe, third reading. So,
Well, I'm not bringing it up here to be critical of anything you did or.
Oh, no, and I think, again.
I think I missed it.
Yeah.
Honestly, because rear yard and side yard, I had no intent of getting rid of chain link fences. You know,
I think that was just meant for the secondary.
I know what we meant, but he's saying it got written differently.
well, I've heard people also say that just they don't like chain link fence periods, but it's to me,
But, I mean, this
Personally,
came from
yeah.
BZ, I mean, that's
Yeah.
the reason I'm bringing it up.
yeah.
My reason for bringing it up to this group, I've been holding a lot of the information that I learned here about what's coming internal and not sharing it with BZA. BZA has asked, which I'm all for, kind of give us an idea of what's happening. And, I'm thrilled that they're that interested in understanding how the process is working. And, but Andrew was the one that really took the lead in this, and I just told him, I said, once an amendment has been approved by, and this is where I might have been in error, Keith's not here, but, or Mayor could probably tell. I told Andrew, unfortunately, when that amendment was approved by Planning Commission and went in for readings, as a Planning Commission member, I can't just make modifications. I would call your representative, who is going to be, and I think you said the same thing to him, Mike, that call them and say, this is a concern. You know, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but this is a concern? Do you have any issues? Because they have the opportunity, and I think, Mayor, you know better than anybody, I think that's the right process, right?
They do have an opportunity, and they can ask for an amendment, they can ask for things to be stricken, yes, absolutely.
Okay. But anyway, and like I said, I'm thrilled that Andrew read it.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy. Like, to me, and again, I have no objection. And in some cases, I would say, like I said, I think it's perfectly right. It's just not. Again, I'm not sometimes a stickler for protocol, but to me, that particular zoning ordinance amendment is in play in front of council.
Correct.
It would be inappropriate if it was something in the last minute. Hey, fix this, fix
Yeah,
that.
and I told him I could not do that, and
Yeah.
I basically, there's no way I could pull it back even if I agreed with him.
Yeah. No, and the other, again, option, again, I hope it gets corrected before, but at the end of the day, similar to the amendment we're working on right now, if there's something we missed or whatever with that first one that is now at its second reading, we can correct it here as well.
So that's I'll let this, I know I said short agenda. Does anybody on the Planning Commission have any reservation about me making 4 copies and sharing it with the BZA, a draft of where we're at with future amendment items? Do you see any problem with that?
This is all a public record, so there's no
It
issue
would seem
with
like they may have a suggestion or two that might be appropriate before it goes into final drafting.
If they're interested,
They're interested. We got a group here that's a good thing.
yeah.
You are their liaison. I mean, you're the liaison
Engaged.
between the two.
Okay, don't yell at me too. I already got yelled at once by a member.
Okay.
Thanks, Gary.
Anything additional? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
We are now adjourned at 4:34 p.m. Thank you, everyone.